The keys felt heavier than they should have in my 18-year-old hands as I stood in the doorway of Riverside Children's Home for the last time. Behind me, the sounds of younger kids playing echoed through the halls I'd called home for 12 years. But ahead lay nothing but uncertainty and the weight of what Mary Gomez, the social worker, had just told me. No family had ever come forward. No relatives had ever inquired. But somehow, impossibly, someone had left me something. An old tractor and the keys to a life I never knew existed. The manila envelope crinkled as I opened it again, still not quite believing the lawyer's letter inside. James Long, attorney at law, had written in formal script that my biological grandfather, a man named Edward Reyes, had died 6 months ago and left me his farm in a town called Cedar Ridge, 300 miles north. The only thing was, nobody at the orphanage had ever mentioned I had a grandfather. They told me my parents died in a car accident when I was 6, and that was it. No other family, no one else who cared, but here were these keys, cold and real in my palm, attached to a keychain that read Reyes Farm Est 1952. My last name wasn't even Reyes, it was Wright, John Wright, the name they'd given me when I entered the system. The social worker had shrugged when I asked about the discrepancy, saying records from that long ago were often incomplete, especially when trauma was involved. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. This story is about to take turns I never could have imagined, and I want to know you're with me on this journey. The bus ride to Cedar Ridge took 7 hours, and with every mile that passed, I questioned whether I was making a huge mistake. What did I know about farming? What did I know about anything outside these institutional walls? I'd aged out of the system with a high school diploma, $200 in savings, and a duffel bag of belongings that fit in the overhead compartment. Now I was heading toward a life that belonged to a grandfather I'd never met, in a town I'd never heard of, to claim an inheritance that made no sense. The lawyer's office in Cedar Ridge was smaller than I'd expected, squeezed between a hardware store and a diner on what appeared to be the town's main street. James Long was a thin man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. And when I walked in carrying my duffel bag, he looked at me like he'd been expecting someone older. "You must be John Wright," he said, standing to shake my hand, "though I suppose we should talk about that name." He led me to a chair across from his desk and pulled out a thick file. "Your grandfather never stopped looking for you, son. When your parents died, there was some confusion about custody. Your mother had been estranged from the family for years, and by the time Edward found out about the accident and that you'd been placed in care, the system had already processed you under an assumed name. He spent thousands of dollars on private investigators, but the trail went cold." I stared at him, processing this information. "So he knew about me?" "He never stopped knowing about you. Never stopped hoping he'd find you before it was too late." James Long opened the file and pulled out a photograph. It showed a weathered man in overalls standing next to a red tractor, smiling at the camera. The resemblance was unmistakable. We had the same dark eyes, the same stubborn jawline. This was taken last year. He was 78 and still working that farm every day, waiting for his grandson to come home. The weight of 12 lost years settled on my shoulders. While I'd been moving from foster home to foster home, convinced I was unwanted and alone, this man had been searching for me. While I'd been aging out of a system that saw me as just another case file, he'd been maintaining a farm and holding on to hope that someday I'd walk through his door. "What happened to him?" I asked. "Heart attack in the barn." Helen Moore, his neighbor, found him the next morning. He'd left very specific instructions about what to do if you were ever located. The farm, the equipment, everything goes to you. There's also a letter. James Long handed me an envelope with my real name written in shaky handwriting. Daniel Chavez Reyes. Seeing it written out like that, seeing a name that connected me to something bigger than myself, made my chest tight with emotions I couldn't name. The letter was brief but devastating in its honesty. "Daniel, if you're reading this, then I've run out of time to find you myself. I never stopped believing you were out there. Your mother, my daughter Elena, was headstrong and proud, and when she left home at 18, she said she never wanted to see this place again. But I always hoped that someday you'd want to know where you came from. The farm isn't much, but it's been in our family for 70 years. If you want it, it's yours. If you don't, I understand. Either way, know that you were loved and wanted every single day of your life. Your grandfather, Edward Reyes. I had to step outside for air after reading it. The main street of Cedar Ridge stretched in both directions, lined with pickup trucks and businesses that looked like they'd been there for decades. People moved with the unhurried pace of those who knew everyone they passed, and several of them nodded at me as they walked by, their eyes curious but not unkind. The farm is about 10 miles out of town, James Long said when I came back inside. I should warn you, it's been sitting empty for 6 months. Edward was getting too old to keep up with everything, and he'd let some things slide even before he passed. You might want to see it before you make any decisions. The drive to the farm took us down a winding county road bordered by fields that stretched to the horizon. James Long drove slowly, pointing out neighboring properties and explaining the local farming community. The Moores own the spread to the east, he said. Helen's been keeping an eye on your grandfather's place since he died. Good people. Alexander Evans runs cattle on the land to the west. Your grandfather used to grow corn and soybeans, but the last few years he'd been leasing most of the fields to other farmers. When we crested a small hill, I saw it for the first time. The farmhouse was a two-story white structure with a wraparound porch sitting in a grove of oak trees. Behind it stood a large red barn, several outbuildings, and what looked like equipment sheds. The yard was overgrown, and I could see places where the paint was peeling, but the bones of the place were solid. It looked like home in a way that nowhere ever had before. There she is, James Long said softly. The Reyes place. We parked in the gravel driveway, and I climbed out slowly, taking it all in. The silence was profound after years of institutional noise. No bells ringing to signal meals or bedtime, no constant chatter of dozens of kids, no staff members calling out instructions, just the wind moving through the oak trees and the distant sound of cattle lowing in a neighboring field. The front door key fit perfectly, and when we stepped inside, I was struck by how lived in everything felt. The furniture was worn but comfortable. Family photos covered the mantelpiece, and there were still dishes in the kitchen sink. It was as if Edward Reyes had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any minute. He left everything exactly as it was, James Long explained, said he wanted you to see how he lived, to understand the kind of man he was. I picked up one of the photos from the mantel. It showed a young couple standing in front of the farmhouse, the woman holding a baby. On the back, someone had written Elena and baby Daniel, 1989. My mother looked happy in the photo, proud and hopeful. It was hard to reconcile that image with the story of estrangement and pride that had kept our family apart. The kitchen was stocked with canned goods and basic supplies. The living room had a comfortable couch facing a stone fireplace, with bookshelves full of farming magazines and novels. Upstairs there were 3 bedrooms, one of which had clearly been prepared for a child who never came. It had a twin bed with a blue quilt, a desk by the window, and shelves lined with books appropriate for different ages, as if Edward had been buying them year after year, hoping. But it was the barn that really got to me. When James Long unlocked the big doors and they swung open, I saw the red tractor from the photograph sitting in the center of the space, maintained and ready to work. Around it were tools hung neatly on pegboards, workbenches organized with the precision of someone who took pride in their equipment, and in the corner, a small office area with farm records dating back decades. On the desk in the office, I found another envelope with my name on it. Inside was a detailed letter explaining every aspect of the farm operation, from which fields were best suited for which crops to the maintenance schedules for all the equipment. It was like a manual written by someone who desperately wanted to teach me everything he knew but had run out of time. He updated this every year, James Long said, reading over my shoulder. Always hoping you'd show up and need to know how things worked. That first night in the farmhouse was the quietest I'd ever experienced. After James Long left, promising to return the next day with more paperwork, I sat on the front porch and watched the sun set over fields that now belonged to me. The responsibility felt enormous. What did an 18-year-old from the foster system know about running a farm? What did I know about maintaining equipment, managing crops, or being part of a rural community? But as the stars came out, brighter than I'd ever seen them in the city, I felt something I'd never experienced before, a sense of belonging. This place had been waiting for me. My grandfather had been waiting for me. And even though I was 12 years too late to meet him, his presence was everywhere. I spent the next morning exploring the property more thoroughly. The farm consisted of 200 acres, most of it tillable land that had been leased to neighboring farmers. The house needed some work, but was structurally sound. The barn was in excellent condition, and the equipment, while older, had been meticulously maintained. There was even a small orchard behind the house with apple trees that were heavy with fruit. It was while I was examining the tractor, trying to make sense of the controls, that I heard a vehicle pulling into the driveway. I looked up to see a pickup truck approaching, driven by an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She parked and climbed out, moving with the confidence of someone comfortable in her own skin. "You must be Daniel," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Helen Moore, your neighbor to the east. I was wondering when you'd show up." Helen Moore had the kind of straightforward manner that put me at ease immediately. She looked me over with sharp eyes that missed nothing, taking in my city clothes in uncertain posture. But her expression was kind. "Edward talked about you every day for the past 12 years, she said. "Showed me your picture so many times I feel like I watched you grow up. You look just like your mother did at that age." "You knew my mother?" "Elena, of course. She grew up on this farm, same as you should have." Helen's expression grew sad. "Stubborn as the day is long, that girl. Broke her father's heart when she left. But he never stopped loving her. Never stopped hoping she'd come back. And when she couldn't, that you would." Helen walked over to the tractor and ran her hand along its side with obvious affection. This old girl was Edward's pride and joy. 1985 International Harvester 5088. Still runs like a dream because your grandfather treated her better than most people treat their cars. You know how to drive her? I shook my head, feeling inadequate. I don't know how to do any of this. I grew up in children's homes in the city. I've never even been on a farm before yesterday. "Well," Helen said matter-of-factly, "I guess it's time you learn. Can't very well run a farm without knowing how to operate a tractor. Come on, I'll show you the basics." For the next 2 hours, Helen Moore taught me everything from starting the tractor to operating the various implements. She was patient but demanding, correcting my mistakes immediately and making me repeat procedures until I got them right. By the time we finished, I was exhausted but exhilarated. There was something deeply satisfying about mastering a skill that connected me to the land and to my grandfather's legacy. "You've got good hands for this work," Helen said as we shut down the tractor. "Edward would be proud, but running a farm is about more than operating equipment. It's about understanding the land, the weather, the markets, and the community. You're going to need help, and you're going to need to prove yourself to folks around here." That evening, Helen invited me to dinner at her place, a sprawling ranch house that sat on a hill overlooking her cattle operation. Her husband, Alexander Evans, was a quiet man with weathered hands and a dry sense of humor who seemed to size me up over pot roast and mashed potatoes. "So you're Edward's grandson," he said finally. "He was a good neighbor, fair in his dealings, helped out when times were tough, never asked for anything he wasn't willing to give. You planning to follow in his footsteps?" "I'm planning to try," I said, "though I have a lot to learn." "Learning's not the hard part," Alexander said. "The hard part is sticking with it when the weather doesn't cooperate, when the markets are bad, when equipment breaks down at the worst possible time. Farming isn't just a bum, it's a way of life. Either you're built for it or you're not." Helen shot her husband a warning look, but I appreciated his honesty. I'd rather know what I was facing than have people patronize me because of my age or background. "Edward never gave up on finding you," Helen said, changing the subject. "Even when the private investigators came up empty, even when people told him to accept that you were gone for good, he'd say, 'That boy is out there somewhere, and someday he's going to want to know where he came from.'" After dinner, Alexander took me out to look at his cattle operation, explaining the basics of livestock management and pointing out the boundaries between his land and what was now mine. "Your grandfather leased me grazing rights to his back 40 for the past 5 years, he said. "I'd like to continue that arrangement if you're agreeable. It'll give you some steady income while you figure out what you want to do with the rest of the place." The idea of steady income was appealing, but more than that, I appreciated being treated like a legitimate landowner rather than a charity case. These people had known and respected my grandfather, and they were willing to extend that respect to me based on his recommendation and my willingness to learn. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into understanding every aspect of the farm operation. I read through Edward's detailed records, learning about crop rotations, soil management, and equipment maintenance. I spent hours in the barn, familiarizing myself with every tool and implement. I walked the property boundaries, studying the land and trying to see it through a farmer's eyes. The physical work was harder than anything I'd ever done, but it felt good in a way that surprised me. After years of institutional living where every aspect of your day was scheduled and supervised, the freedom to work at my own pace and make my own decisions was intoxicating. When I fixed a broken gate or successfully started the tractor on the first try, the satisfaction was entirely my own. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The farmhouse had been empty for 6 months, and problems kept cropping up. The furnace needed repair, several windows had broken seals, and the roof leaked in 2 places. My savings from the children's home were quickly depleted by necessary repairs and basic living expenses. It was Helen Moore who suggested I talk to Emma Carter at the local bank about an operating loan. Edward had a good relationship with them, she said. They know the farm is profitable when it's properly managed. You just need to convince them you're serious about making this work. The meeting at Cedar Ridge Community Bank was intimidating in a way that reminded me of all the official meetings I'd sat through in the foster system. Emma Carter was a professional woman in her 40s who clearly knew the local farming community well. She reviewed Edward's financial records with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen plenty of farm operations succeed and fail. Your grandfather was a conservative manager, she said. Never borrowed more than he could afford to pay back, always made his payments on time. The farm has good bones and productive land. The question is whether you have what it takes to continue his legacy. I explained my situation honestly. No farming experience, limited financial resources, but a strong desire to learn and make the operation work. Emma Carter listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions about my plans and my understanding of the challenges ahead. I'm willing to extend you a modest operating loan, she said finally, enough to get you through the first year while you learn the ropes. But I want to see a detailed business plan, and I want regular check-ins on your progress. This isn't charity, it's a business investment, and I need to see results. Walking out of the bank with approved financing felt like a major victory, but it also increased the pressure I felt to succeed. People were taking a chance on me based on my grandfather's reputation and my own untested potential. I couldn't afford to let them down. The learning curve was steep and sometimes frustrating. I made mistakes that cost time and money, like planting a test plot too late in the season or incorrectly adjusting the tractor's hydraulics and damaging an implement. But for every mistake, there were small victories that built my confidence and skills. The community's acceptance came gradually. At first, people were polite but reserved, clearly waiting to see if I was serious about farming or just a city kid playing at country life. But as weeks turned into months, as they saw me working long days and asking intelligent questions, the attitudes began to shift. It was at the monthly Grange meeting that I felt the first real sense of belonging. Helen had convinced me to attend, saying it was important to be part of the agricultural community if I wanted to succeed. I was nervous about walking into a room full of established farmers who'd known each other for decades, but the welcome was warmer than I'd expected. "You're Edward's grandson," said an older man named Daniel Chavez, ironically sharing the first name I just learned was mine. "He was a good man, helped me out when I was starting up, never asked for anything in return. You need any advice, you just ask." The meeting covered topics I was just beginning to understand: commodity prices, weather patterns, new agricultural techniques, and local political issues that affected farmers. But listening to the discussions gave me insight into the challenges and opportunities facing the community I was now part of. After the meeting, several farmers approached me with offers of help or advice. Some had equipment they were willing to lend, others offered to share their expertise in specific areas. It was clear that the farming community took care of its own, and my grandfather's reputation was opening doors for me. By late fall, I'd successfully harvested my first crop, a modest planting of soybeans on the farm's most manageable fields. The yield wasn't spectacular, but it was respectable for a first-year farmer, and the income helped stabilize my financial situation. More importantly, the experience taught me lessons about timing, weather, and market conditions that no book could have conveyed. The physical demands of farming had changed me in ways I was still discovering. The soft hands and pale complexion I'd brought from the city had been replaced by calluses and a tan from working outdoors. I'd gained muscle from lifting feed sacks and wrestling with equipment, but more than the physical changes, I felt mentally stronger and more confident. It was during harvest season that I found the box of letters in the farmhouse attic. I'd been up there looking for storm windows when I noticed a wooden crate pushed into a corner under the eaves. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to me at various foster homes and children's facilities, all returned as undeliverable. My grandfather had been writing to me for years, sending letters to every address the private investigators had uncovered, hoping one would reach me. The letters chronicled his daily life on the farm, his hopes for my future, and his regrets about the circumstances that had separated our family. Reading them was like having conversations with him across time, learning about the man who'd shaped the place I now called home. One letter written just 6 months before his death particularly moved me. "Daniel, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted you to know that every decision I make on this farm is made with you in mind. When I plant the orchard, I imagine teaching you to prune the trees. When I repair the barn, I picture us working together on future projects. This place is yours in every way that matters, and it's waiting for you whenever you're ready to come home." The weight of his love and faith in me was overwhelming. He'd maintained this farm not just as his livelihood, but as a legacy for a grandson he'd never met, but never stopped believing in. The responsibility of living up to that faith motivated me through the difficult winter months when the isolation of rural life sometimes felt overwhelming. Winter brought different challenges and different lessons. With no crops to tend, I focused on equipment maintenance, land improvement projects, and planning for the next growing season. I spent hours in the barn workshop, learning to weld and fabricate parts, skills that would save money and make me more self-sufficient. The quiet months also gave me time to explore my family's history more thoroughly. I found photo albums documenting 4 generations of Reyes family farming, marriage certificates and birth records that traced our lineage back to Mexico, and business documents that showed how the farm had grown and evolved over the decades. My mother appeared in many of the photos as a child and teenager, always smiling, often covered in dirt from helping with farm work. It was clear she'd been loved and cherished, which made her estrangement from the family even more poignant. I found her high school graduation photo with a note on the back. "Elena, class of 1988, full scholarship to State University. We're so proud." Spring brought renewed energy and the challenge of planning my second growing season. Armed with a year of experience and a better understanding of my land's capabilities, I decided to expand my operation slightly, adding corn to complement the soybeans and leasing additional equipment to handle the increased acreage. The decision to expand required another meeting with Emma Carter at the bank, but this time I walked in with confidence earned through a successful first year. My business plan was detailed and realistic, my financial projections based on actual experience rather than hopeful guessing. "You've exceeded my expectations," Emma said after reviewing my proposal. "Edward would be proud of what you've accomplished. I'm approving the additional financing, and I'm reducing your interest rate based on your proven track record." The expanded operation meant longer days and more complex logistics, but it also meant greater potential profits and a more sustainable long-term business model. I hired seasonal help during planting and harvest, mostly high school and college students from town who were eager to earn money during school breaks. Working with the seasonal crew taught me about leadership and management in ways I'd never anticipated. These young people looked to me for guidance and direction, despite the fact that I was barely older than some of them. Learning to delegate responsibilities, provide clear instructions, and maintain safety standards while keeping everyone motivated was a challenge that stretched my abilities. But the most significant development that spring was meeting Ashley Johnson. She was a veterinary student at the State University, home for summer break, and working part-time at the local feed store. I'd been coming in regularly to buy supplies and had noticed her efficiency and knowledge about livestock and agricultural products. "You're Edward Reyes's grandson," she said one day as I was loading feed into my truck. "I heard you've been doing a good job with the farm. That's not easy for someone without experience." Ashley had grown up on a dairy farm before her family sold out and moved to town, so she understood the challenges I was facing better than most people my age. She was practical and direct, with an easy laugh and an obvious love for rural life. Our friendship developed naturally over shared interests and similar backgrounds of hard work and determination. Having someone my own age to talk to about the challenges and rewards of farming made a huge difference in my confidence and outlook. Ashley understood the satisfaction of a successful harvest, the frustration of equipment breakdowns, and the deep connection to land and community that farming fostered. By midsummer, our friendship had evolved into something deeper. Ashley would stop by the farm after work, and we'd walk the fields together while I explained my plans for crop rotation and land improvement. She'd offer suggestions based on her agricultural education and her family's farming experience. "You're building something important here," she told me one evening as we sat on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset. "Edward's legacy, but also your own. This place is becoming yours in a way that goes beyond ownership." The second harvest was significantly more successful than the first, both in terms of yield and my confidence in managing the operation. The expanded acreage produced enough income to pay down debt, invest in equipment improvements, and start building a financial cushion for future expansion or unexpected challenges. More importantly, I felt truly established in the community. People no longer introduced me as Edward's grandson who's trying to farm, but simply as Daniel Reyes who runs the old Reyes place. The distinction might seem small, but it represented a fundamental shift in how others saw me and how I saw myself. The success also brought new opportunities. Alexander Evans approached me about a partnership to raise cattle on my unused pasture land, offering to share both the investment and the profits. Helen Moore suggested I consider diversifying into specialty crops that could command premium prices at farmers markets. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. James Long, the lawyer who'd first told me about my inheritance, stopped by the farm one afternoon with a visitor. Linda Lewis was a social worker from the state office, and she'd come to see how I was adapting to life outside the foster system. "We don't often get to see success stories like yours," she said as I showed her around the farm. "Most young people aging out of care struggle with the transition to independence. You've not only survived, you've thrived. We'd like to document your story as an example for other kids in similar situations." The idea that my experience could help other foster children was both humbling and motivating. I'd been so focused on my own challenges and growth that I hadn't considered how my success might inspire others who felt as lost and alone as I once had. That fall, I spoke at a conference for social workers and foster care administrators, sharing my story and emphasizing the importance of helping young people discover their roots and potential. It was nerve-wracking to speak in front of professionals, but the response was overwhelmingly positive. "Your story shows that family isn't just about biology," one social worker told me afterward. "It's about connection, legacy, and belonging. Your grandfather gave you more than a farm. He gave you an identity and a purpose." The speaking engagement led to other opportunities to share my story, and I began to see how my experience could make a difference for other young people facing similar challenges. The farm wasn't just my inheritance anymore. It was a platform for helping others discover their own potential for growth and success. As winter approached again, I reflected on how much had changed in just 2 years. The scared, uncertain 18-year-old who'd left the children's home with nothing but a duffel bag and some mysterious keys had been replaced by a confident young farmer with a successful operation, a supportive community, and a clear sense of purpose. The farmhouse no longer felt like someone else's home that I was borrowing. It was my home, filled with my own memories and plans for the future. I'd added my own photos to the mantelpiece, including pictures of successful harvests, community events, and moments with Ashley that captured the joy I'd found in this new life. The third spring brought the biggest challenge yet, when a late frost threatened to destroy my entire corn crop just as it was emerging from the ground. I'd invested heavily in the expanded planting, and losing it would have been financially devastating. The weather forecast showed temperatures dropping into the 20s for 3 straight nights, well below the threshold that young corn plants could survive. It was Alexander Evans who suggested the solution. "We'll need every irrigation system in the county," he said. "If we can keep water running over the plants all night, the ice will actually insulate them from the worst of the cold. It's risky, but it's your only chance." What followed was the most intense 3 days of my farming career. Neighbors from miles around brought portable irrigation equipment, generators, and pumps. We worked around the clock, moving from field to field, adjusting water flow, monitoring temperatures, and praying that our efforts would be enough. Ashley coordinated the volunteer effort, organizing shifts and ensuring that hot coffee and food were available for the crews working through the night. Helen Moore opened her kitchen to feed anyone who needed a meal, and even Emma Carter from the bank showed up with thermoses of soup and words of encouragement. By the third morning, when the sun finally rose on temperatures above freezing, we'd managed to save about 80% of the crop. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough to keep the farm financially viable and demonstrate something more important than money could measure. "This is what community means," Helen said, as we surveyed the ice-covered but surviving corn plants. "When one of us is in trouble, we all pitch in. Your grandfather understood that, and now you do too." The experience cemented my place in the farming community in a way that years of gradual acceptance couldn't have achieved. I'd been tested by circumstances beyond my control, and both I and my neighbors had risen to meet the challenge. The bonds forged during those 3 desperate nights would last a lifetime. The saved crop produced a decent harvest, and the story of the frostfight became part of local farming lore. More importantly, it taught me that success in agriculture isn't just about individual effort. It's about being part of a network of people who understand that everyone's prosperity is interconnected. That fall, Ashley and I got engaged. The proposal happened naturally during one of our evening walks through the harvested fields. We've been talking about the future, about her plans to finish veterinary school and potentially start a practice in Cedar Ridge, about my ideas for expanding the farm operation. "I can't imagine building this future with anyone else," I told her, as we stood in the orchard behind the farmhouse, surrounded by apple trees heavy with fruit. "Will you marry me and help me turn this place into everything my grandfather dreamed it could be?" Her yes was immediate and enthusiastic, followed by plans that stretched late into the night. We'd marry after her graduation, combine her veterinary skills with my farming operation, and build a life that honored both our dreams and the legacy we'd inherited. 5 years have passed since I first held those mysterious keys in the doorway of Riverside Children's Home, and the transformation has been more complete than I could have imagined. The farm now encompasses 300 acres, supports a small cattle operation, and includes a veterinary clinic that Ashley runs from converted outbuildings. We've been married for 2 years, and our first child is due this spring. The scared, uncertain boy who knew nothing about farming has been replaced by a confident agricultural entrepreneur who serves on the County Farm Bureau Board and mentors other beginning farmers. The empty farmhouse has become a warm, welcoming home filled with laughter, plans for the future, and the kind of family stability I'd never experienced growing up. But perhaps the most meaningful change is the program we've started for young people, foster care. Working with Linda Lewis and other social workers, we've created internship opportunities that give kids hands-on experience with farming, business management, and rural life. 3 young people have already used the program as a stepping stone to agricultural careers, and several others have found direction and purpose they'd never had before. "You're giving them what your grandfather gave you," Ashley said recently, as we watched our latest intern successfully operate the same red tractor that had been my introduction to farming life. Not just opportunity, but belief in their potential. The irony isn't lost on me that the keys I thought represented nothing more than an old tractor actually unlocked a life richer and more fulfilling than anything I dared to imagine. My grandfather's faith in a grandson he'd never met created possibilities that extended far beyond the boundaries of our farm. Every morning when I walk out to start the day's work, I pass the small cemetery on the hill where Edward Reyes is buried. I've added a bench there, and I often sit for a few minutes to update him on the farm's progress and thank him for the gift of belonging he gave me. Sometimes I imagine I can feel his approval in the wind moving through the oak trees he planted decades ago. The old tractor still runs perfectly, maintained with the same care my grandfather showed it. But it's no longer just a piece of equipment. It's a symbol of continuity, of legacy passed from one generation to the next, of the belief that everyone deserves a place to call home and work that gives their life meaning. If you're watching this and you've ever felt lost or unwanted, if you've ever wondered whether you matter to anyone, I want you to know that somewhere there's a place for you. People who will value what you bring to the world and opportunities waiting to be discovered. Sometimes they come disguised as old keys and impossible inheritances, but they're real and they're worth fighting for. Tell me in the comments about a time when something unexpected changed your life's direction. Share this story if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding family and purpose in unexpected places. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with the smallest steps, and sometimes home is waiting in places we never thought to look. The keys to my future were heavier than they looked, but they were exactly what I needed to unlock a life worth living.